Hello, welcome to Blogging Heads. I'm Matt Duss of the Center for American Progress, and with me today for the first time is Elizabeth Tsurkov, a friend of mine from Israel. Elizabeth is an analyst and blogger at 972 Magazine, at 972mag.com, or is it .org?
.com.
.com. She writes also for Global Voices and does work in Israel with refugees. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Nice to be here.
Yeah, thanks so much for doing this. I'm glad we finally got around to it. Since this is your first time here on Blogging Heads, could you just give us a little background on yourself? You know, how you came to do the work that you do.
Well, I grew up in a very typical Russian-Israeli family. We made Aliyah, immigrated in the 90s, and my family is quite conservative and right-wing. And my views were very much shaped by my parents as a child, naturally. But gradually my views began changing, and now I find myself going to the protests of the radical left with only about 300 people, the same 300 people. So quite a significant change over time.
Mm-hmm. So we just finished, the latest round of fighting in Gaza, an offensive that started, the offensive that started last week, I believe it was Tuesday that Hamas military commander Jabari was assassinated. That came after, I think, several months of increasing rocket fire from Gaza into Israel. So after I think just over a week, we saw a ceasefire brokered by Egypt with the support of the United States. What's your take on what we just saw? Why did this happen now, and what do you think some of the impact will be?
Well, the timing is definitely a result of just the fact that there was an increase in rocket fire and a Hamas attack on an IDF tank. And soldiers were injured. But I think the fact that things escalated with the assassination of Jabari really raised many questions for people not just on the left, but even on the right, even a right-wing paper, Makor Rishon, they featured an op-ed there saying that this is kind of an election war, and that Netanyahu is doing this to Barak as well, are doing this to improve their chances at the polls, even though it's pretty obvious that the current government will continue governing after the elections by changes. So I think because of the increasing rocket fire, even though Netanyahu did not fear, losing the elections, he didn't want to appear weak. People in the south once again started sleeping and living in bomb shelters, and he wanted to do something aggressive. And the fact that they were able to kind of trick Jabari into thinking that there's a ceasefire and that he can come out of hiding kind of gave the Israeli government a lot of confidence. We are able to trick them. And because of this, Israel then announced that it will call in a huge number of reserve duty soldiers. The cabinet authorized drafting 75,000 people. 56,000 were called up in the end, which is a huge number. And CAST led the operation in 2008 and 2009. Only 10,000 people were called up. So basically, 50,000 soldiers, reserve duty soldiers, were called up. Many of them were then stationed around Gaza, exposed to rocket fire, and this resulted in dozens of injuries and casualties. And basically, it was an attempt to basically bluff and make Hamas agree to a ceasefire by stationing those troops and kind of signaling, we will invade unless you comply with our desire for ceasefire under our conditions. And Hamas didn't buy stuff. Netanyahu was, I think, confident in his ability to trick them and get them to do what he wanted. But they did not buy his bluff, and we ended up having kind of a ceasefire. I think the results of this round were not positive, not for Netanyahu and not for Israel in general.
So explain that. Why specifically do you think the outcome was not positive for Israel?
Well, I think for Israel, it also depends on how you define what is good for Israel.
Right.
I think that the closure of Gaza, the sea blockade, at least the limitations on fishing, are wrong and are counterproductive. But the Israeli government insisted that this is the right policy, and because of that, the fact that this kind of round of fighting resulted in the easing of the closure and growing range in which Gaza fishermen can fish, is kind of a loss. But on top of that, I think it is my opinion as well, as a leftist, that this round of fighting did not benefit Israel. First of all, we lost billions and soldiers, and this operation cost billion shekels, could have spent on other things. And the fact that Hamas came out as the legitimate ruler of Gaza, as the entity that we are now in contact with and negotiating with and trying to rein in the other more radical factions, definitely Israel kept trying to weaken Hamas. It was the goal for years now. Mm-hmm. The closure, the blockade, sanctions were all designed to achieve that, to weaken Hamas's rule and eventually get rid of them. Netanyahu declared that this is his goal, to destroy the Hamas rule in Gaza. And now suddenly we are talking to them and we are actually trying to strengthen them so that we have a responsible adult in Gaza who can rein in the more radical. So this is definitely opposed to Israel's policy for the past few years.
I mean, that's what's really interesting about all of this, and I think a number of people here in the States have commented on it, including me, is that you have, whatever steps have taken place along the way, you effectively have right now a Hamas which is able to point to its use of violence, and to say that we have achieved certain policy goals through the use of this violence. Whereas Mahmoud Abbas and the PLO and the PA government in the West Bank is not. I don't think there's anyone who can look at the events of the last few years and say that the moderate Palestinian leadership under Mahmoud Abbas has gained more through nonviolent means than Hamas has been able to through violent means. And I think that's it's a very dangerous lesson to teach, wouldn't you say?
Definitely. I mean, I think in a way, this is not some kind of a conspiracy theory, but the fact is Netanyahu has no interest in negotiating with the Palestinian Authority. He has no interest in strengthening Abbas. He does everything he can to undermine him. So I think in a way, strengthening Hamas and presenting them as the real rulers, the real representatives of the Palestinian people, an organization that is employs terrorism, an organization that is anti-Semitic, an organization that does not accept Israel's existence and aims to destroy it. This is the kind of partner, kind of opposite side that Netanyahu wants to present to the Israeli people to convince them there is no point in negotiations. So I think this does harm Israel because it weakens the moderates, but I think it benefits Netanyahu and it benefits the right because they can continue saying there is no point in negotiating Abbas. He is powerless. He cannot control Gaza. And obviously we cannot negotiate with Hamas because they're terrorists. So we should just keep things as they are. And this is exactly what Netanyahu has done over the past 2 years. He has not progressed 1 inch in the peace process.
Mm-hmm. So what do you? I mean, Hamas. When the ceasefire was originally signed, and it's a very short document, a lot left very vague. But one of the things that Hamas leaders, including Khalid Mashal, immediately came out and said that as a part of this ceasefire, we will, the closure will be lightened. There will be more movement of people and goods through both the Israeli crossings and the Egyptian crossing. Do you see that as likely?
Well, Egypt is a whole different matter. Also depends on control the Egyptian regime has over it and the military has. I think the military is definitely not interested in opening the crossings, especially considering the fact that terrorist attacks that occurred on Egyptian soil. There is evidence that at least some of the attackers came from Gaza through the tunnels. But I think there is definitely a chance that Israel would ease the closure if it sees that Hamas is keeping its side of the deal, meaning reining in all the troops in Gaza, and there is no rocket fire from Gaza. I definitely think Israel will attempt to maintain this peace by easing the closure. Obviously, some things will still Israel will still prevent their entry. Example, fertilizers that can be used to manufacture explosives, etc.
Right.
But I definitely see this happening, but it will only happen after the elections because this is not something that Netanyahu wants on his record when people go to the polls.
Right. I mean, we'll get into the elections and the Likud primaries a bit later. I just want to stay on the Hamas point right here. I mean, a question here. I was speaking, looking at the evidence, the way that Israel has managed the closure, the things that it has chosen to allow and disallow, and specifically the way that it has drastically clamped down on travel from Gaza to the West Bank. Gisha, the organization Gisha, an Israeli human rights organization, has done really good work on the lack of freedom of movement of Palestinians, and has an interesting document. And this is something I've been looking to as well. And it's that the point of the policy is to cultivate greater political separation between these two wings of the Palestinian national movement. Now, I spoke with a friend here in D.C. yesterday, who we'll just say part of the kind of more conservative pro-Israel group here in D.C. And she insisted this was not true. I mean, she just insisted that it was the Israeli government was interested in Palestinian reconciliation. And what's your take on that?
No, Israel is completely not interested in reconciliation, and the fact is that now, after this round of fighting, some talks between Fatah and Hamas started taking place, and right away Israel went on arresting the Hamas members of parliament who were negotiating with Fatah in the West Bank.
Yeah.
So this is completely untrue, and of course there is a policy of separating those two areas. Israel wants Egypt to be in charge of Gaza and provide their needs for contact with the outside world. And the West Bank, Israel thinks that it could manage as long as the military presence there remains the same. So this policy of separation is very much real, and it is again designed to, if you're talking about the Palestinians together, then first of all, Jews become a minority, in this piece of land. So when you kind of don't count Gaza in, suddenly the demographic balance doesn't seem so scary. There doesn't seem to be an immediate need to compromise because we're still the majority here. And also this policy is designed to weaken Gaza's economy. I mean, the West Bank is a prime target for export from Gaza, and Gaza now barely exports anything. The closure, as we know it, is basically over, but the problem is the lack of exports. And Israel doesn't want the Gazan economy to rebound. It wants to, at least that was the policy until this round. Now we really have no idea.
Yeah.
Maybe now that it wants to strengthen Hamas, it will allow these kind of exports. But as of until
you say
2
if
weeks
it
ago,
wants
the
to
policy was
strengthen
to weaken
Hamas, it will allow the exports?
What?
You said if it wants to strengthen Hamas, it will allow the exports?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the Gazan economy is now largely reliant on aid from UNRWA and other groups. So I think if Israel now basically completely changed its policy. So if Israel now suddenly wants to strengthen Hamas, it might allow exports to the West Bank. But this is really something that we'll have to wait and see, and this again definitely will not happen before the elections. Maybe we need another round of bloodletting and unnecessary bloodshed for Hamas to receive the right to export. This seems to be the way to get things done here.
Right. That's unfortunate. So turning to the Israeli political scene, the point you made, raising the possibility that there was part of this was there was a political goal here. That does not seem to have worked for Ehud Barak. Am I wrong in saying that?
Well, he did bounce in the polls, but before the operation, his party did not cross the election threshold, which is 2%. After the operation, they did cross it. They got 4 mandates in the polls, but he decided to quit. Honestly, it's extremely difficult to understand what's behind this because there are reasons that are just not something that the general public is made aware of. Personal considerations, things with his family, business opportunities, it could really be anything. But it did work it could have capitalized on that. I mean, the public suddenly people decided to go vote for him, even though his party at no point in the polls in the past few months did it cross the threshold. The operation did damage the Likud-dominated list, the joint list of Likud and Israel Lieberman's party. But I think this is the dynamic that, the fact is most right-wingers and basically anyone in Israel were very unhappy with the results of the operation because Hamas is now strengthened, people died for no reason, this cost us, obviously, Israelis died for no reason. There is not a huge deal of concern for the death of Palestinians. So this seemed kind of pointless. And, thousands of soldiers were called up and made to, they were placed around Gaza and sitting there like sitting ducks, getting injured and killed. So this definitely did not help Netanyahu. I think he definitely miscalculated with this operation because he thought that he could force Hamas into a ceasefire on his own conditions with this kind of threat of an invasion.
Right.
But I think now with the primaries in Likud and moving to the right, and we'll talk about that later, I think the boss, they lost a few seats in the polls at least because of this unsuccessful operation, because people drifted right to more right-wing parties like Ehud Barak, which is the far-right group, and Habayit Yehudi, which is a national religious Zionist party. But now I think with the primaries, he might regain those votes, at least from that those more right-wing voters who were unhappy about the capitulation to Hamas.
Right. So let's talk a bit about the let's get a bit more into the Likud primaries here. What does the Likud party look like right now after yesterday?
Well, it looks looks significantly different. I mean, the top 10 of the Likud, even in the previous list, which was much more right wing than previous lists. The top 10 included people who were reasonable, people who were promoted by Netanyahu, who were pushed by him, who were invited to join the Likud by him personally. So the list that we currently have is very different. It's much more right wing. We have people in the top 10 and top 20 who are ideologically very committed to the idea of Israel as a Jewish state, not so much a democratic state. People who have made racist statements that are completely unacceptable in any Western or democratic country, inciting against Palestinians, against Arab citizens of Israel, questioning their loyalty, against African refugees in Israel. So this is definitely a list that is much more right wing than the one we previously had. And part of this is a result, I think, of the failed operation. People were very disappointed in Netanyahu's leadership in this operation. Many of the people who vote in the Likud primaries don't actually vote for Likud in the general elections. The people who vote in the Likud primaries are generally more right-wing than Likud voters. Many people from settlements are members of the Likud party, and they have joined the Likud party just so they can vote in the primaries and make the list more right-wing. And this has worked for them. The leader of this group of settlers, Moshe Feiglin, who was previously, after extreme efforts by Netanyahu, was pushed out of the list in the previous elections, primaries, is now in the 15th place, and he supports religious rule over Israel. He supports building the third temple, which is the view that is extreme, even among religious people in Israel, because most religious people think that the temple created once the Messiah returns, not returns, comes to us. So this is a very extreme right-wing view, and he's also a homophobe, and obviously doesn't believe in human rights at all.
I think I saw that he recently wrote an op-ed called "I Am a Homophobe."
Yeah, I'm a proud homophobe, and he expressed
I am a proud homophobe.
That are completely alien, even to the Likud. I mean, most parties in Israel are on the right are quite hawkish in terms of security, but they are much more socially liberal than, for example, the GOP in the U.S. Members of the Likud party support the gay rights, at least express support for it. Historically, they don't actually vote for gay rights, and when there are attempts to pass laws that would improve gay rights in Israel, they block them, but at least rhetorically they do support them. They don't object to gay rights. But this is a very extreme kind of person who has made it into the list, and he's very foreign to the party. Religious, he's not religious, extremely religious in his views. So he's definitely foreign to the Likud as it used to be. The current Likud is a very right-wing party. Many said that it's even to the right of Lieberman's party, Israel Beitenu, which is itself quite fascist. So the right wing in Israel
you would use the term fascist.
What?
You said fascist?
Yeah, I mean, because it's not just about racism or about hawkishness. Yeah. It's also about active attempts to decrease civil rights in Israel, decrease the strength of the Supreme Court. So these attempts to limit, for example, one of the MKs who is now in the top 10 list, Zev Elkin, passed a law that would forbid Israelis publicly support boycotting settlement goods. So this is a significant limitation on free speech.
Right, and I
Other
think this is
laws
where
are
one of the two leading Likud figures who will not serve in the Knesset now, Benny Begin and Dan Meridor.
yeah. So we have Benny Begin and Dan Meridor, and
this was a
also
couple of years
Mickey
ago when
Khan.
the anti-boycott law,
Yeah.
the anti-boycott speech law was passed. It was Benny Begin who in an interview said that this has a whiff of fascism.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, these people, basically Benny Begin, Dan Meridor, and Mickey Khan all served as ministers without portfolio in Netanyahu's government, and they were very much promoted by Netanyahu in the previous primaries and given these positions of ministers, even though there were no ministries to give to them. Those people are very kind of moderate and, comparatively to the right wing in Israel, which is very extreme. But they represent the kind of liberal tradition that the Likud once had. And those people, all of them are in places that basically guarantee that they will not be elected. So the list is very much dominated by young right-wingers who grew up in homes that were very, very right-wing, and they moved further to the right.
Yeah. Before we move on to Tzipi Livni, let's talk for a minute about this fellow Danny Danon. He's someone who I think has been building bridges with American politicians and figures for a while. He's the guy who invited Glenn Beck to Israel last year. He also appeared alongside Texas Governor Rick Perry during the UN General Assembly last year when Rick Perry was still a candidate for president. So yeah, I mean, he's someone who's become more and more visible over the last few years, and he has clearly extreme views. And for the longest time, as I've been talking to more conservative friends of mine, they've tried to downplay the significance of Danny Danon, I think, which is a good sign that they find his views kind of indefensible. But now they're going to have to kind of step up and defend them because he's clearly a leader in the Likud.
Yeah. Well, it's no secret that the Likud supports the GOP, and Netanyahu would have preferred Rami to win. But Danny Danon has made this kind of support for the GOP very, very evident in the fact that he supported Perry, and that in the U.S. The kind of events that he hosts are very kind of politicized, and of course the invitation of Glenn Beck, which actually was very unsuccessful. The people who showed up to the events that he hosted were mostly non-local. So, but Danon is again a pretty young MK. In the current Knesset, he's only a member of Knesset. He's not a minister. He did serve as the head of two Knesset committees, and he used both of these committees to advance his extreme right-wing agenda. For example, he headed the Absorption and Aliyah Committee, which is about Jewish immigrants and their needs. And he constantly incites against African refugees. He was at a rally in May 2012 in Hatikva neighborhood in southern Tel Aviv. And during that rally, he called for the deportation of refugees from Israel, which is against international law, of course. And after this rally, a rally in which also Yariv Levin and Miri Regev participated, both of them are members of the top 13 in the Likud party now, with the new list. So after this, the rally, and after the speeches at the rally, the protesters went on an attacking spree, a real pogrom of businesses owned by asylum seekers in southern Tel Aviv, and anyone who is African with black skin. I was there that night after the protest, obviously not during it, and it was really a horrible sight. I mean, There were people bleeding. There was blood on the floor. There were shops attacked. People were stealing from shops. So they really, their kind of hate speech has immediate effect. It is not a theoretical kind of supposition. It's a fact that those people were incited by Dani Danon and others, and they went on to attack after them. For example, Dani Danon used the fact that he's the chairman of this committee about Jewish immigrants to tour southern Tel Aviv about the harm caused by African refugees to the Jewish immigrants. So it's not connected in any way. There are very, very few Jews who live in the areas populated by refugees in southern Tel Aviv, in the Veshanan, where he did the tour. It is an area mostly populated by refugees and migrant workers from Asia. But still, he did this kind of tour, and he talked there about the need to deport the refugees and the fact that they are criminals, all of them, and that they need to be deported, that they need to be forbidden to work in Israel. He also organized the Knesset hearing about the fact that that Arab men kidnap Jewish girls, this kind of very clear race baiting. I mean, by Israeli standards, he is extreme. By Western standards, he's the complete nut job. And I really hope that people understand this. Even by Israeli standards, he is extreme.
Well, charming. Let's move on to talk about Tzipi Livni, who just announced a new party. And tell us a little about that party and its name and what you think Livni's impact and future in Israeli politics might be.
Well, Tzipi Livni was offered both by the Labor and by Yair Lapid, who is a kind of TV personality and columnist turned politician now. Both of them offered her the second place, and she refused. And she started her own political party called the Movement, but it can also mean the gesture and the traffic. It's a very kind of, she wanted the name to mean that she's moving forward, but most people think about good gestures when they think of the name. The problem with her party is that she claims that she's doing this to strengthen the centrist left bloc. But the fact is that all polls show that she only takes votes from other parties that are center left.
Right.
She takes votes from Labor and she takes from Yair Lapid's party. And this goes to show the problems with the Israeli left, which is very, very fractured. But not only that, I mean, it would be understandable if it was extremely fractured if there was significant ideological differences. But, for example, between Yair Lapid and Tzipi Livni, there isn't a significant disagreement between them. Just each of them wants to head a party, and each of them wants to bring their own people with them. So they haven't managed to agree to run together. And the result is that there are the left in Israel is projected to receive about 50 out of 120 seats in the Knesset, and we have 5 parties in the 6 if you count Kadima, which doesn't cross the election threshold. It really goes to show that centrist parties come into the politics, they go up because people are tired of this kind of divisive left and right, and they want to vote for a centrist party that seems to cater to everyone, and people vote to them en masse, and then they just implode. Right now, Kadima is the largest party in Knesset. It has 28 seats. And now in all polls show that they do not cross the election threshold, meaning they get 0 seats. And this current Tzipi Livni party and this Yair Lapid party, all of them will also at some point disappear, and new centrist parties will be created this is a cycle that keeps happening. But the problem is that the left in Israel is no longer left. There's about 7 seats in the Knesset who can be really considered left. The Labour Party is leftist in terms of economics. They are social democrats. But they are the head of the Labour Party, in an attempt to attract voters from the right wing. She's refusing to talk about the occupation. She's refusing to talk about anything that has to do with the peace process. So this means that the left is now largely center-left, dominated by the centrist parties, in an attempt to attract voters from the right, but those voters from the right aren't moving over. So this kind of attempt to hide the true positions or to actually truly change the leftist positions about the occupation hasn't really borne fruit. And the result will still be a right-wing government after these elections, unfortunately. We know it's very hard to imagine a scenario in which the left-center bloc is able to form any kind of government. And all the centrist parties have not committed to only staying in their bloc, meaning if Netanyahu invites them over to join this coalition, they will. They might moderate this way, but they might be used as a fig lift for a very, very right-wing party. So it's really, the situation, the current situation of the left in Israel is very depressing, and this is at a time when the left is really, really needed. This is at a time when we need significant pressure for a return to the negotiation table, for a return to any kind of attempt to end this conflict. Netanyahu, in the past, all political leaders, when they campaigned for elections, they kept promising, security, but also peace. Each and every one of them promised peace. And now no one bothers to promise peace except the left, the 7 mandates of the left. So it's really a problem, and no one talks about this right now, and that there isn't a willingness in the centrist leftist parties to talk about this and try to make this into an election issue.
So before we finish, looking at what you just described, the situation in Israeli politics now, what role can the U.S. play? There's been talk here in D.C., will President Obama re-engage on the peace process? Under what circumstances and what environment will he do that? How will he go about it? Do you see, given the political realities in Israel you just described, what does that matter? How is there a way that the United States could go about this to move things toward a resolution at this point?
I think this is a very good question, because right now, because as I've described, the left in Israel is extremely weak, but the fact is that the weakness of the left does not only affect Israelis. We could say that Israelis chose these people. They chose right-wingers who would privatize services and cut services and continue to deprive them of civil rights. But the fact is that the elections in Israel also affect millions of Palestinians. So we cannot afford to say that, this is the leadership that Israelis chose, and tough luck for the Palestinians. The world needs to remain involved in trying to push Israel towards a peace process. And by the world, it really means the U.S., because Israeli governments have never cared about the public opinion or the governments other than the U.S. So I think the U.S. definitely has a role to play, and I think it is playing it in some ways. There is no peace process, but the U.S. has prevented some, at least I know about refugee issues and certain laws that were very, very kind of anti-democratic against the court. Those laws were halted basically by pressure from the U.S. from the U.S. embassy. So the U.S. is doing something. It's wrong to say that it's not doing anything, but obviously there was a great deal of timidity ahead of the elections, and Obama was not willing to do anything to jeopardize his elections, and it is understandable. But now that he doesn't have to worry about winning another election, I think he definitely needs to re-engage with this issue. And I think if Netanyahu forms more kind of centrist government, he will definitely have more partners to try and push that. And if it's only, again, a very kind of right-wing government, then there are other ways. There are ways to pressure, to use public opinion to show Israel that the current path, the continuation of the occupation, the continuation of the oppression of Palestinians is not beneficial for Israel's long-term interests. I think the U.S. definitely has a role, and I definitely hope, and I know that many others really hope, that the U.S. will once again seize to an attempt to push it forward, even though the Israeli government is unwilling to.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Elizabeth. I really enjoyed it. I look forward to doing this again.
Me too. It was a great pleasure.